What's up YouTube, Saf here on SuperSaf TV, and welcome to another SuperSaf style camera comparison between the Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus and the iPhone 10. In the usual style, we'll be looking at both the front and rear facing cameras and at images as well as video too. Do also look out for the audio icon in the corner of the screen, and that will indicate to you which device the audio is coming from. We'll be switching between these two to give you guys a better idea of the differences in audio as well. So we're currently using the front facing cameras to film from both devices, and we are taking a bit of a walk just to see what the stabilization is like. So you can see. All right, now let's go for a bit of a run. This is actually very risky because we've got snow, as you can see. So I'm running in the snow. Now we have switched over to the rear facing cameras. We're filming at 4K 30 frames a second, and we do have 2x optical zoom on both devices, so we can get in much closer to our subject. Let's switch back. Right, now we're just going to be testing out the stabilization. So, a bit of a walk. And now let's change that into a run. Similar tests, but this time 4K 60 frames a second, which both are capable of. Although this video is going to be exported out at 4K 30 frames a second. Now, interesting fact, you cannot use the 2x optical zoom when you are filming at 4K 60 frames a second. We're just going to test out the stabilization at this frame rate, so just walking. Now let's run. A bit of a different situation. We've got some tricky dynamic range here, so just want to see how well both of these will do. 4K 30 again. Both seem to be doing pretty well. Now just testing the autofocus on the iPhone 10. Seems to be doing pretty well. Same test on the S9 Plus. Dual pixel autofocus, super fast. So that was the video. Now before we move on to images, just looking at what we're working with here. Front facing cameras, the iPhone 10 7 megapixels with an f2.2 aperture, the S9 Plus 8 megapixels with an f1.7 aperture and autofocus. For the rear facing cameras, we have dual cameras on both devices, all 12 megapixels. The secondary camera is similar on both devices, telephoto. It's going to give you optical zoom with an f2.4 aperture and optical image stabilization. The primary camera on the iPhone 10 has an f1.8 aperture with optical image stabilization. And the S9 Plus has quite a unique setup. You've got dual aperture, f1.5 as well as f2.4 with optical image stabilization. And the S9 Plus is going to switch between these two depending on the lighting in your scene. I've actually done an explainer video about this, and I'll link that in the cards if you're interested to find out more. If you want to pick up some dope skins like I have done here for my phones, then definitely check out our video sponsor Dbrand. It's a great and inexpensive way to customize your devices. I'll be leaving a link to them in the description below. Final point to mention, everything has been shot on automatic to keep things as fair as possible. Right, now let's kick off with some selfies. Both doing a good job here overall. The S9 Plus is wider. Also seems to have a little bit more balanced dynamic range between the background and the foreground. The iPhone 10 has definitely favored the foreground. Now this will come down to personal preference. Both are doing a good job overall. Another selfie here. Once again, I do think the S9 Plus has more balanced dynamic range. You can see that we still have some of the detail in the clouds, whereas that has been blown out on the iPhone 10. Now, I did take my shades off because some people complain that having shades on does have an effect. So here you can see very similar results. The background is quite blown out on the iPhone 10. On the S9 Plus, the dynamic range is definitely more balanced. Now testing out the portrait modes from the front facing cameras, which is going to blur the background. Here I do think that the S9 Plus is doing a better job on the edges. The iPhone 10 has blurred a bit of the side of my faces, my hair as well as my jacket. Now, a side note to mention, the S9 Plus does struggle if you've got sunglasses on to apply selfie focus. I know this does not apply to everybody because not everybody wears sunglasses 90% of the time like I do, but it's just something that I thought I'd mention. Now, doing a test without my sunglasses, and both, once again, very similar results to previously. The iPhone is definitely blurring out a bit more of those edges compared to the S9 Plus, which is doing a better job. I don't think either of these are doing absolutely great, but out of the two, I do prefer the S9 Plus. Low light selfies, the S9 Plus definitely doing better here. The colors are definitely better maintained. We've got a bit of a green tint on the iPhone X, which does not look good, and the details in the foreground have been lost quite a bit. Now, using the front-facing flash on both devices, the S9 Plus a little bit too bright for my liking, but still better than the iPhone X in my opinion. The iPhone X definitely a lot more noisy compared to the S9 Plus, and also the colors have been lost a lot more on the iPhone X compared to the S9 Plus. Now let's move on to the rear-facing cameras. So testing out a macro shot, both doing quite good here. I'd say the edge for dynamic range does go to the S9 Plus. If you look in the background, we've still got a bit more of the color maintained, whereas that has been blown out on the iPhone X. Going in 100%, both are doing very well in terms of the detail. Now the wide shots are both doing good here, but we've got some differences in color, cooler tones on the iPhone X and warmer tones on the S9 Plus, which is kind of odd because it's usually the other way around. This, I think, will come down to your personal preference. Now, using the telephoto cameras on both, it is going to give you some optical zoom, and you can see that we can get in much closer to our subject. Same differences in color, but both are doing really well. Now, I wanted to test out the dynamic range a little bit more, so I went to the situation where the dynamic range is a lot more tricky. And here, the iPhone X has maintained details in the shadows better compared to the S9 Plus. Although we've got slight more detail in the clouds on the S9 Plus, personally, I do prefer the iPhone X image here. One last wide shot in a good light. Once again, very similar, I'd say, and both seem to be doing good in terms of dynamic range and overall detail. Now let's look at the portrait mode on both devices. Both seem to be doing really good here. We've got a nice blurry background. If you do go in 100%, neither of these are perfect. You can see that my ear has been lost a little bit on both devices because it's apparently quite similar in color to the background here, but nevertheless I do think both are doing pretty well. Now another shot here with a more complicated background. Once again, I think both are doing really well. If you do look closely, I think once again on my ear both of these have struggled slightly, but this is only something you'll notice if you do go in 100%. Overall, I think both are doing a really good job. Now let's move on to something that I know a lot of you guys are excited about, and that is low light. Here the S9 Plus has definitely maintained more color, and it's also less noisy compared to the iPhone X. If you look at the sky, it's definitely cleaner on the S9 Plus. Now another low light shot, and I went to a colorful graffiti wall just to see how well the colors are going to be maintained, and once again I do think the S9 Plus is doing better here. The noise levels are also lower on the S9 Plus compared to the iPhone X. One final shot in low light, and both doing good here, but once again colors and detail better maintained on the S9 Plus. I do think this is thanks to the super wide f1.5 aperture. If you look at the red around the 30 sign, that color has definitely been maintained a lot better on the S9 Plus compared to the iPhone X. So there we have it, guys, the much awaited S9 Plus versus iPhone X camera comparison, SuperSaf style. Now in terms of my opinion, for the front facing camera, the S9 Plus definitely wider and more balanced dynamic range, which I did prefer overall. And also the portrait mode from the front facing camera I did find slightly better on the S9 Plus. On the iPhone X, it really does struggle. Now overall, I don't think either of these are exceptional when it comes to the portrait mode from the front facing camera. This is something that I do think the Pixel is better at, and we will be testing that out in a future video. Low light selfies, once again, I do think the S9 Plus was better overall. Images were brighter with less noise, and I do think that's thanks to the wider f1.7 aperture. Now for front-facing camera video, I would have to give the edge to the S9 Plus. You've got better dynamic range overall. It's more stable, although it does crop in for that stabilization, so that is a compromise you have to make. Now, although images were actually very good on both, slight differences in color, which will come down to personal preference. In terms of dynamic range, I'd say it's a bit of a draw. Some of the images I prefer the dynamic range on the S9 Plus, and on some I prefer the iPhone X. Now for video, it was quite interesting because I think both did great in terms of quality overall. The S9 Plus did seem a little bit more stable when walking, but it was slightly choppy. I think the stabilization maybe a little bit too aggressive, So when you do have stronger movements, it does seem to jump a little bit. 4K 60 frames a second, very similar on both. The stabilization wasn't too great on either of these when you're at 4K 60 frames a second. For autofocus, I would have to give the edge to the S9 Plus. I think it was slightly faster because of that dual pixel autofocus. And also slow motion, I would have to give the overall win to the S9 Plus, because although you've got 1080p at 240 frames a second on both, you do have the additional option on the S9 Plus of 720p at 960 frames a second, which is pretty insane. Now in terms of the portrait mode from the rear-facing cameras, I think both did pretty well, and I would call it a bit of a draw overall. Neither of them were perfect, and we did have slight defects, but I think they did do a good job overall. With the S9 Plus, you do have the option of editing the blur after the fact, which is nice. And on the iPhone 10, you have studio lighting, which is going to let you toggle through some different modes. And moving on to logo light, this is where I think the S9 Plus definitely won because of the wide f1.5 aperture. You had less noise overall in the images, and the colors were better maintained. Finally, the audio. This is a similar situation that we've had in the past many times. We've got stereo audio on the S9 Plus. On the iPhone 10, it only records in mono audio. Now you can go back and have a listen, but stereo audio definitely wins in my opinion. The S9 Plus did sound louder and more rich. Now that's what I think anyway. What do you think? Definitely drop me a comment below and let me know. Also let me know which SuperSaf style camera comparison you'd like me to do next. I know a lot of you guys want to see the S9 Plus versus the Google Pixel 2 XL, and that will be coming in the next few days. So make sure you have subscribed and switch on notifications to see that first. If you want to see lots more images from lots of devices, then give me a follow on Instagram. I'm at SuperSaf, and I do post quite regularly on there. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, then do hit that thumbs up button for me. Thanks for watching. This is Saf on SuperSaf TV, and I'll see you next time.